Welcome to the Reconnected podcast, a home for sharing, understanding, and growth for the retail grocery store industry. During each episode, we will meet an amazing member of our community as we learn about their story and jointly explore the intricacies and challenges of our supply chain. Through it all, we'll remember and honor that everything starts with the real people who spend so much of their lives supporting the retail food supply chain. We will bring together the voices of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers as we journey together to help our industry reconnect. My name is Luke Abbott, and I'm excited to have you join us. Thank you for being the second guest ever on the Reconnected podcast. Great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This is ideally a free-flowing conversation between us. And what I'm trying to accomplish, and why I started doing this and asking like people I highly respect like you to join me, is to be really working together to think about how we kind of reconnect our supply chain in a way that is, I guess, in a more positive light. I see there's often a lot of conversations about almost like victimhood, like, oh, this part of the supply chain is victimizing me, or I feel like I can't win, that this is stacked against me. And on some level, part of this is education. Some of it's also like exploring ideas about how we just do this better. I think when you and I have been in the industry for a long time, and there was a time that I really felt like everybody felt they could win, whether you're the manufacturer, the distributor, the retailer, that everyone felt that they could win. And now I feel like that doesn't seem to be the same sense. So that's what we're digging into here. And, you know, Wade, I think it's best to have you introduce yourself, because you are beyond, you're beyond description to me. So can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so my name's Wade Yenny. I'm currently the Vice President of Center Store and Space Planning for the Fresh Market in Greensboro. I've been in the grocery business for probably too long, but let's call it 20 plus years at this point, and worked in a variety of capacities, from store level as a salaried grocery manager overseeing center store, to spent most of my career in Ohio with the Bueller's chain, leaving there in 2019 as a senior director of center store and house facility. Spent some time in Louisiana with Rouse's, and leaving there as the director of non-foods, general merchandise, health and beauty, and candy confections. And then spent some time in California with our mutual friend, Jimbo.
J-Dog.
Yeah, exactly. Jimbo's with, leaving there as the director of grocery before starting in this newest role. So I've traveled across the country and back in the last 5 years. And I'd like to say that I've learned a lot along the way, but I'd say that I'm still learning every day. I think it's it's a fun business to be in, but it doesn't come without its faults. So
I agree. And I asked you to be here as my second guest because you're one of the people I admire and respect most in the industry.
I appreciate that.
Well, and it's more than like, hey, you mentioned like what role you have today, but you're so much more than that role. And what I'd like to explore a little bit with you today is a little bit more about who you are and about your story, about how you got here. And then we'll spend some time maybe talking about the current state of the industry and kind of what can be done, what we're doing to try to move things forward. And you mentioned Bueller's, is that where you were for many years? But how did you get started and decide you wanted to be in this industry?
Well, it's funny because I like to say that everything happens for a reason, and I truly believe that. I don't just say it.
Yeah, I agree.
So I chose to, I should say, in the restaurant business. I started cooking on a whim in high school as a weekend job, and that parlayed into me being a salaried manager, which transitioned into me deciding that I was smart enough and good enough to be a restaurant owner at the age of, let me do the math, 22-ish.
Wow.
So which obviously didn't work out, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. But but in the course of that journey, I don't know that we've ever talked about this before, but this is cool. I was a salaried assistant manager for a family business, a chain of family family restaurants in Ohio, and was waiting for promotion. I was full of piss and vinegar, and was just kind of, okay, I want to be a store manager. I don't want to be an assistant. And it was slow going. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna look for something else. And so I had two interviews or two job offers. One was a independently owned restaurant, small, basically be running the show. And one was an hourly assistant manager or hourly restaurant manager trainee, which in my opinion at that point was kind of a slap in the face. But that job offer was from Bueller's, and they had full service restaurants in their grocery stores. And while I declined that offer politely, I was smart enough at that point to not burn any bridges.
Yes.
The individual that made the offer, Greg Bueller, stayed in contact with me, which will come into play later. So I took the job as the independent restaurant, and about 10 months into that, the owners decided that they wanted to spend more time at home with the kids. Henceforth, I decided that I could take out a loan and be a restaurant owner, and I did. It survived for about 3 years, and it just came to a point where I had to make a decision. It just wasn't working financially, and so I decided to close the restaurant. And at that time, I thought back to Greg, who coincidentally, over the course of those 3 years I had the restaurant, he'd stop in the restaurant every so often and have something to eat, grab a tea, and just catch up with me, say, hey, how things go on, just kept the relationship open. So when I decided to close the restaurant, Greg was the first person I called. And so long story short, I went to work for Bueller's in 1998, I think, 1998 as a salaried restaurant manager, which was, in my opinion, was a big step from being that hourly trainee. I was an hour, so I did that, and I did that for probably 2 years, and quickly decided that if I wanted to move up in the organization, I better learn the grocery business. And so I started into grocery then at that time, spent the next year training at the various locations throughout Ohio, and spent 2 weeks or so in every single department that I would eventually manage, cashier, night crew, receiving, stocking shelves in grocery, stocking shelves, dairy, frozen, beer and wine, you name it, I did it over that next year. And then I eventually got placed as a salaried grocery manager at the Wadsworth location in early, so 2002, I think, 2002, midway to 2002. And then from there, eventually made the move to the corporate office. So
that's an amazing journey. And I'm curious, like, did you see yourself as you started, working at Bueller's, like this was going to be my future, I want to make this a career, or was there a point in which you said I wanted this?
At the time, I was a career restaurant guy. I mean, I like food, and I like to think I know my way around the restaurant, but the grocery piece of it, like it was self-motivated to, if I wanted to move up, I needed to learn it. But yeah, at that time I did. I saw a large organization, 13 stores, tons of opportunity as far as locations, and so I looked at it as a pretty decent career at that point, and as far as a good move to make. So, and I'd like to say
I think it was. Did you have a vision? Did you see, like, what was your vision then, or was there a vision, like, where this was going to lead?
When I joined a lot of the moves I've made, I've always went with the mentality that I often felt in going for an opportunity, I wasn't necessarily the most qualified, but I also held myself accountable that if I didn't go for an opportunity, I didn't want to wake up or if I did not go for an opportunity, I didn't want to wake up the next morning, look in the mirror and say, why didn't you do it? What were you thinking?
You said yes. So, you're like, yes.
Well, yeah. And so when I made the move to corporate at Bueller's, I was 2 years into my salaried grocery management. And so the logical career path would have been store manager, maybe some kind of operational piece, from there. But that opening came up, the individual was retiring, and thinking from a quality of life standpoint, going to the office on a Monday through Friday, no holidays, weekends, etc. That appealed, because I had kids, and I really wanted to be able to, I'd spent so much of my life working crazy hours that I wanted to be able to change that quality of life a little bit. And so I went for that job. Definitely was not the most qualified, but for whatever reason, I got chose for it. And from there, I just, let work speak for itself.
I love it. And along the path, were there any like a key mentor in your
Oh yeah,
career path?
there's numerous ones, but the most significant one, and if you're trying to make me cry, you might succeed.
That is the goal.
The most significant one was the individual that offered me the job at Bueller's, the corporate job. His name is Harry Graham, and he was an old school. I made a post about him. It's been a while. He passed away in 2017, I think,
Okay.
unexpectedly. But he was an old school grocery guy. Had spent some time with Kroger and through some various independents in the Ohio region. But when I say old school, he was the grab you by the throat and
Yes, yes.
call you everything under the sun. But then whenever you were done, you'd shake his hand, smile, and say thank you, because he just commanded that respect.
Yeah.
And he gave me that opportunity because I think he saw something in me. And he was just so instrumental in my career as far as influenced me in the beginning from a buying perspective. And then, just kind of, he was the kind of tough love, I mean, he would never pull any
Yes.
punches. He would never, he wouldn't micromanage, but he would certainly let you know that, hey, next time let's do this, or what he held his people accountable. So that, without question, he was my biggest mentor in those early days in the buying side.
What do you think he saw in you?
I just think probably a little bit of, because when I think if you ask people in the mid 2000s what Wade was like as a buyer, they'd say that he'd try and get you for every penny that he had. And just really, I think he saw a little bit of himself. It was funny because the other mentor that comes to mind was the guy that gave me the shot into grocery. His name was Harold Sickles, and he was our kind of our titles changed, but call it the VP of operations. I mean, he was the guy at Bueller's for operations for most of the 80s, 90s into the 2000s before he retired. And the first trade show I went to, I'll never forget, I think it was a Khe show, and Harold and Harry and I were sitting down after our first day on the show, and we were having breakfast or something. And Harold looked at Harry. Harry said, I don't think I need to come to the shows anymore. Wade's got it covered. And
Wow.
Harry looked at Harold. He said, I think you're right. And so, so getting that stamp of approval from those two, who, again, if you talk to anyone's dealer's account, and it knows Harold and Harry, that respect and that's like the biggest compliment I could ever get. So yeah.
Yeah. You sharing about that first mentor that you talked about, right? The one that kind of gave you the shot and coached you, and they gave you that tough love. It's like I feel like almost in today's world, like we I don't know, that the place for someone to be that direct and guy by the throat, so to speak, feels like it doesn't have a place anymore as much. And I'm curious if we are able to be as effective, maybe especially with young men, because we have to be kinder. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, because I'm thinking I don't know anyone that's like that. I grew up with old school as well, and I just don't see that much anymore.
I think I'd like to think that I've evolved as a person, and both personally and professionally. So I think from my perspective, it's not who I want to be anymore. Certainly there are days when I have to be, but it's a lot more fun, in my opinion, to kind of work together and accomplish things instead of me being really selfish, which back in the day. But I think depending on the organization, on what facet of the business you're in, if you're in conventional, I think it's probably a little bit more prevalent than we see on the side
definitely
that we're
more.
on. And I think if you look for the bigger mass markets and things like that, I know that mentality still exists. But I also know, in talking to so many emerging brands and young brands, that they certainly appreciate that mentality, and so I'd like to say I see the best of both worlds, because having lived it to some extent and understanding the motivation and the reasoning behind that mentality, I get that side, but like I said, I like to think that I've evolved so that mentality, or those motivations aren't my priorities right now. They're that's kind of past, but hopefully I don't have to take a step into that realm again and revert back to the nasty guy. But you never. It's a constantly changing environment, and I think depending on what side of the desk you're on, certainly influences how you react
Mhm.
and respond.
Yeah, agreed. And thank you for sharing. And I also, if you're comfortable sharing, the transition from Jimbo's to the fresh market felt like a really interesting one for me. You're Jimbo's iconic, I think 4 or 5 store chain when you were there, and then going to like over 150 stores. And I think you thought you were going for one title and ended up with another. Is that like, does that go back to this like the I just said yes and kind of what you said at the beginning of your career? Is that just continuing to play out? I mean, this feels like an amazing story.
I don't know about amazing. That might be overstating a little bit, but I think again, I think if at some point, if I decide to write a book or just kind of put some notes down and talk a little bit about
Mm.
it, it's certainly interesting. I don't amazing again. I'd say fascinating,
Fascinating. We'll go with that.
questionable.
We'll go with that. Not questionable. Fascinating.
I
We'll
was
go
gonna
with that
say
word.
you might want to ask some of my family what they think, but no, I think when I look at it, each move I've made, I would like to say they were deliberate or calculated, but truthfully, I don't know that that's the case. I think when I talk about my move to Jimbo's, and I know I've shared this with them, but I don't know that it really sticks with them. The what happened when I left Rouse's and went to Jimbo's, but I like to call it divine intervention. Rouse's is a great organization. I have many friends there still and have no negative words to speak
Mm.
about them. But we our daughter, our youngest daughter, had relocated to San Diego right after graduating college. She graduated in December of 19 and moved to San Diego with her college roommate who had gotten an internship in San Diego. And so our daughter thought, well, she had a degree in fashion merchandising. California makes sense. So those two young ladies went out there. And so that was in January of 2020. And we all know what happened a month or
Mm.
so later. And so we're in rural Louisiana, doing things with Rouse's. I'm trying to find sanitizer and, bleach and anything else that people can
Yes.
keep sterile with. And in the process of that, my wife says, she said, we need to go to California and see Zoe. And I said, there's a pandemic. We're not. And if you know me, Renee says, she said, yeah, and so we bought tickets to go. And I think I have documentation to prove this, but we had that conversation. We bought tickets, and within 24 hours of buying those tickets, a recruiter contacted me about the Jimbo's opportunity.
Wow.
And so, and light bulbs go off, and it's like, okay, it's meant to be. So we went out to visit our daughter. I interviewed, and that's how I ended up there. So conversely, when made the decision to come here to North Carolina, that kind of played out. I love Jimbo. I love the
Mm.
organization.
Me too.
In a different world, who knows? We might work together again sometime, or who knows? But that primarily financially motivated from a standpoint of our condo lease was coming up, and we looked at ourselves and we thought, we're not getting any younger. The average home and where we lived in Southern California was around $800,000, and it just didn't make a lot of sense financially to look at that kind of investment in a home. I won't say we were living beyond our means, but when we looked at 15, 20 years down the road, it was going to be a significant piece that we had to consider. The opportunity for the fresh market presented itself again through a recruiter. And, I have to admit, I was certainly, aside from the financial piece and the cost of living here, I was definitely intrigued by the organization, the scope of responsibility, so many states, so many stores, obviously the biggest organization I've worked for to date. So it was kind of one of those things where, it comical because we, leaving Ohio, Louisiana, California, and then now here in North Carolina, it's almost like since we left Ohio, we made a move. And so I know when I talk to friends and family about coming, what are you doing? But again, when you look at every move,
Yeah.
there's been a reason behind it, and it's helped me grow again, both personally and professionally. So I like to think it's been a good journey. we're still going. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you're just getting started. And you
Yeah.
mentioned Renee. I've had the honor of meeting your amazing bride, and I'm curious in terms of you've moved a lot. What role, and you've grown a lot. What role has Renee played in kind of supporting all this in your career and life?
She's been just a saint. Again, I swear you're trying to make me cry. Like there's somebody in the background there saying, "Hey, ask him this." But no, I tell people she walks on water. And in my mind, she does. She's kind of that person on my shoulder that keeps me straight. And any move we've made, we spent before this last move, and any other move for that matter, we spent a lot of time, self reflection. Pluses and minuses. For this particular move, we spent walks on the beach. I think we walked from Carlsbad to Encinitas and back, talking about this opportunity.
That's a good walk.
Well, it is. It was probably pushing 15 miles round trip.
Yeah.
But it was deliberate from a standpoint of what we discussed, all the pluses and minuses, because we knew it was a big decision. We were leaving. Our youngest is still out there, and that was very hard to do, and continues to be hard to do. At the end of the day, we held hands and we agreed that this was the right decision, and here we are. And I think every step along the way has been kind of that same thing. She's been more than supportive, because she's sacrificed. I won't say she's completely sacrificed her career, but in all intents and purposes, she's kind of has, because she's moved, and she was a licensed social worker in Ohio, and then she was in Louisiana too. But since then, she hasn't maintained her licenses. She's kind of stepped back and let me flourish. And I can't say enough about that her doing that. It's just it's so meaningful. So.
Yeah, having been around you both at a number of dinners and other experiences, it's just the love that you have for each other is something that it inspires me, and I think inspires everybody. That's like, you're like that the couple that we all aspire to be. And so it's great. And everything you talk about, like doing things together and going for the long walk and talking, just sounds like your communication, it sounds like, right? And sharing the decision making. What do we want to do? What do we want to do here? Yeah.
We genuinely like to spend time together, and very seldom are you going to see one of us without seeing the other outside of work. I mean, it's we like we play together, we work together. Outside of work, we work. If we are at work, whatever. But I mean, it's. I've talked to you and I've talked about this from a dream job. My dream job is Renee and I to be able to do something together, because we feel right when we're together, and it makes for a long work week, doing the 9 to 5, 8 to 5, 7 to 5, whatever it is, and then only having a couple hours together at home. So that's certainly a long-term goal, would be able to do something together so that we're truly together all the time.
Oh, that is beautiful. And thank you for indulging in some of these questions. I get that, you mentioned tears a couple of times, and I think the reality is, and part of what I want to do in this experience, these podcasts, is like humanize the different people that are in the supply chain. Like we are all real people with dreams and challenges and love interests and everything else. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing about your journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also, one of the things I admire about you is I've read your posts, like sales tips from a buyer's perspective, and I've talked to brands where they've mentioned your name, that you've kind of given some coaching, and I'm curious, like from where is that coming from? Is it a sense of responsibility? Is it something that you just enjoy? Is it, I'm just curious what drives you, because you have a full-time job. You're, more than a full-time job. I've seen you outside of work. You're still working. How are you why are you making space for this in your life?
Well, I think it's the golden rule, first and foremost, treating people the way you'd want to be treated, and I think, honestly, it goes back to my restaurant days, just that hospitality aspect that, that's what I grew up in, is, you're greeting your customer, you understanding that the people coming through the door are paying your bills by, patronizing your establishment and coming back and whatnot. So they don't want to come in and not be treated warmly, and they want to be taken care of and be served good food and so on. So I think that mentality translates a lot into what we do now from a standpoint of working with brands and wanting to see them succeed, because ultimately you succeed if you're carrying their products, right? So I think the evolution for me, coming from that hard-nosed guy in Ohio to Louisiana, where I think that the people down there, and I know you're familiar with a lot of them as
Yep, totally.
just the culture there, it's just so rich and so warming, and so I think that evolution started to switch a little bit then, along with my mentor that I talked about a little bit earlier with Harry when he passed. Not that I didn't already know this, but it was kind of like another reminder that life is short and you don't know if you have tomorrow. So you want to be proud of who you are and what you've done. And so I think that started to resonate a little bit more with me. Also, when my father passed, about 10 years prior to Harry, and then moving to California with Jimbo's, I could say that Jimbo still has kind of that little bit of that hard-nosed mentality, but we both know that under his skin, he's still a soft guy. I don't care what
he is.
I'll tell him that. But I think there, especially when I moved there, it was completely in Louisiana. I still had a little bit of contacts I was familiar with from Ohio because they were in conventional. There was still some common interests there and common people. But moving to California, it was almost entirely new, right? I knew no one. It was a completely new channel of the business, being that natural, organic, high-end side. And then beyond that, we had COVID. So people weren't coming in the office. So I was like, okay, how am I going to, put myself out there and start, meeting people and seeing brands and seeing things if I don't put myself out there. So that's when I really dove into LinkedIn and really started posting more and just being open there.
Yeah.
And then just the ability in California to work closely with brands, it was kind of the same thing. I can name example after example of people that I passed, worked with on the way up, or of their journey. When you talk about Midday Squares, when you talk about French Squirrel, when you talk photo, when you talk about Forage, I mean, I can go on and on and on, example after example, person after person. But working firsthand with those individuals, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Annie with Sweet Duets and Tao with Fun Sesames, right?
Oh, Tao, she's great. I love.
They probably
Tao.
chase me down. They probably chase me down if I. But all those people, right? Those journeys, those stories, it really just got me invested in the people aspect of it, and wanting to see them to succeed, and having a platform at Jimbo's to help them succeed by putting them on the shelf and connecting them with our marketing department, and doing things on social and just all those things. It was invigorating. It was kind of like a shot in the arm, which I needed with that second, third, whatever it was, move in so many years, and then the pandemic, all these different things and emotions going on. It was kind of like a saving grace to have that ability to work so closely with so many awesome personalities along their journeys, and it's just kind of, I've kept that mentality here, to the extent that I don't work with brands as closely as I used to because of the scope of what I'm doing, but the feeling to see them succeed is certainly still there, and if help them with the platform that I have, whether it's personally or professionally, I'm going to do it just because it's the right thing to do, for me, at least in my mind it is.
That's beautiful. I love how you related it back to hospitality. I grew up at Monterey Provision, and we were a food service distributor, and so we were really in that hospitality space. And hospitality, it's like, you're right, in a way, it isn't about you. It's really about the other person, and it's about giving to them. You're giving, hopefully from a full heart, to create an experience and to help them. And it's really kind of, how you put it, it's like there's a humility tied to it. There's a sense of giving others a gift, and really, I think we learn in life, and we give gifts. The giver often gets even most of the joy from being able to help others out. And I imagine there's some value for you in that. Is that I heard you talk about it, like there's a sense of pride of like, not what you did, but what you kind of helped others do by encouraging and sharing stuff you already know. So you're just sharing information and love and encouragement. So it's really, really, really beautiful. And so I want to honor you, because think about this, like reconnecting the supply chain for a very someone from a retailer perspective, to really just show up and just say, hey, how can I help? This isn't supposed to be a black box. It's not supposed to be opaque. let me teach you like how to show up and how to talk to a buyer, and maybe don't follow up every 3 hours on an email. I remember one of your posts talking about that, right? It's like probably not going to be effective. So I think it's yeah, I think it's beautiful how you're doing that. And I'm also curious about CPG vibes. Like how did that show get started, and kind of what is your vision, and is that going back to the hospitality as well, or
So should have during the introduction, I should have talked a little bit about that. I'm the co-host of CPG Vibes, formerly Friday Vibes, which we do every Friday live on LinkedIn with Alex Bear, of the founder of Genius Juice. And how did it start? So again, going back to California, as I started to get my feet somewhat planted there in the sand, I obviously started making connections. So I did some. Was asked to be a guest on several podcasts. Alex, 15 Minutes of Genius, I did.
Yep.
Mark Samuels, I can't think of what he calls his, but I did his. I did Allison Kane's. I'm probably missing a couple, but I started doing several. And at the time, Alex was doing, and I think he's still doing the 15 Minutes of Genius, which is, kind of the 15, 20 minute founders or whatever, whoever he interviews. And then also periodically he was doing a show on Friday, which he called Friday Vibes. And he would either do that by himself or sometimes he'd have a guest host or something like that. And I'd done the 15 Minutes to Genius, and we hit it off pretty well. And we'd had some conversations. We carried his product to Jimbo's, and as the end of whatever year that was, you'd have to go back and look at it. Whatever the end of the year that was, 2021, whatever it was, I think he and I were talking, just about business, and I said, we should make that Friday. I did Friday Vibes, I think, as a co-host, one of his co-hosts.
okay.
And I think I reached, I said, we should make that a weekly thing. And he's like, that's a good idea. And it just kind of rolled from there. So at Jimbo's, when I was there, it was we did it obviously West Coast. A lot of our audience at that time was on the West Coast, and so it was a morning thing. It was the first thing I did, well, not working very early at Jimbo's, but things I did on Friday mornings. We get on at 8:30 in the morning and do the show and kind of go into the weekends. And we morphed into CPG Vibes because we wanted the flexibility to get outside of Fridays if we needed to, but then also we wanted to kind of accentuate the fact that CPG is what we're talking about, right? So when you ask about where it wants to be, I'm sure or where we want it to be, or me specifically, I think if you ask Alex, you might get a little bit different answer, but I think generally we're on the same page from a standpoint of we just want to contribute to the community, resource for brands, for brokers, for just everyone to get together and talk about the business. And ideally, in my mind, I go back to that helping aspect of, giving someone something that they don't have, whether it's you being on there talking about the services you provide and coaching people and whatnot. Last week we had Quentin on from Equity, who just has a fantastic story as a founder and how he got to where he is. So sharing those stories, because so much of you hear and see is all about the good, and oftentimes there's a lot of bad that has to happen before you can get to that good, if you get to that good. So I think for me, the ultimate goal is to continue to just preach, that might not be the right word, but practice that sense of community and project it out there so that it's a safe space for everyone to get together and ask questions. There's no stupid questions, ask questions, get feedback from people who've done it, who are doing it, or who want to do it, so that it's just a resource of information for people that are in the space, as to, okay, what can they do? And so now we've been at it almost a year and a half now. So I guess that puts us, we started in 2021, right? Or no, 22.
I don't even know.
I think it was 22, because beginning of January 22, because in next year, the beginning of next year it'll be 2 years. So yeah, because we're on episode 80-ish or so.
Got it.
So
Got it.
I think that's where I think
we're doing pretty much every week. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, we have been on the show and excited about being on it soon as well. And again, it does feel like a way for the community to kind of end their week together the way it's set up right now, and just sharing and learning and growing. Going back to your career a little bit, you mentioned some of these stories about, and your story, by the way, I think is inspiring as well, right? And talk about other brands that or people you've had on your show. But I'm curious, there's also the idea of resilience. What was your biggest failure you've had in your career?
Without question, it was the restaurant. I mean, I'm not too ashamed to admit it. It ended in bankruptcy, a personal bankruptcy.
Wow.
So, and if you think about it, and again, I'm not too proud to admit it because I tell people I started working 16, 17 and haven't stopped, and I didn't go to college.
Yeah.
I went to salaried management 50 plus hours a week at the age of 18,
Wow.
and so when you talk about personal failure, to have a bankruptcy on your quote unquote record at the age of, what was I at the time, 25,
That
26,
is crazy.
it is. And so when you talk about a biggest failure, but I also say that those years, that was my college. I mean,
Yeah.
I learned so many things about business, about life, about me personally, that, it's something that I don't feel that any college in the world could have taught me. And
Right.
so, but that biggest failure, though, the long story is that biggest failure has led to my biggest success, because without that
Yes.
failure, I wouldn't have came back to Bueller's. I wouldn't have went down the path that I went. I probably would have kept doing that restaurant in my hometown and, serviced the people and hired local kids to do dishes, and would have stayed there and been happy and lived life. But it didn't work out. And because of that, I'm where I am today. So.
That it's amazing. And I think that's what we need to hear, right? Like to your point, you put yourself on the field of battle, the field of play, if
Right.
you will. And
Right.
there's always a risk. And what's great is we live in a country where you can fail and you can come back and you can have a super stellar career like you have. I think it's amazing. And I want to read you a quote that I live by, and I'm curious if this resonates with you. That life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up and totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride!" That's Hunter S. Thompson. I'm curious. It seems like you've lived this life of like really pushing the limits, like not taking this always the safe course, right? You
Right.
almost like going out on faith in some ways, and then really pushing yourself. I'm curious if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it absolutely does it.
Mm.
But in Hunter Thompson, obviously, is profound. I'll simplify it for you. And if you look at my about me on
Mm.
LinkedIn,
Yeah,
the first line is a line from Chumbawamba, the song. I get knocked down, I get up again. You're never going to keep me down. And
there
I
it is.
think, I think, and I've left that there. I've never changed that on my profile, because I think it's so pertinent to who I am
Mm.
and where I've been and where I want to go. Because it's okay to fall down, but you have to get back up,
Mm.
and I go back to that analogy of looking in the mirror and being able to look at yourself and be okay with the decisions you've made or not made, in
Mm.
either case. And so you get knocked down, you get up, it's more often than not, it's your choice to get back up. And I think,
Mm.
it's about picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and keeping moving forward, and
Mm.
sometimes you do have to take a couple steps back, but as
Mm.
long as you keep focus on the future, I think, and what's ahead of you, as opposed to dwelling on what the mistakes you've made. I think that's the way to be. And
Mm.
so for me, I'd like to think that, you know, speaking personally, especially Renee and I, we try and live the most every single day that we can. I mean,
Mm.
we try to go places, we try to travel, we see shows, because again, we're not promised tomorrow, and
Mm.
we want to make,
Mm.
if God forbid something happens and tomorrow doesn't come, I want to make sure today was the best day it could be, and I'm the
Mm.
one that controls that. I'm the one that
Yeah.
controls that, for the most part.
Mm.
Certainly there's some outside factors,
Mm.
but I can choose to be miserable. I can choose to just sit here and not do
Mm.
anything, on the keyboard all day or what have you. But I think, it's about accountability and really wanting to make the most of yourself and the life that you've been given. So
Yeah, I agree. There's this tool I use. It's a model called the Cartman's Triangle, and if you've heard of it, it's like this idea of the triangle is like that. There's the victim, the aggressor, and then there's like the savior. And I spent too much of my life, and too often in my life, being like in the victim mode, or seeing like woe is me. This is all that's happening. It's like. And then what I've really worked on is shifting into this like higher level energy of like creativity, challenger energy, right? Really just being out of this like drama space and really being this space of like, you know, and I've written about this recently about like fear. Like I used to be riddled with fear and just so scared of losing it. And I'm guessing I'm curious with you, I believe that the fear is something that's from God. God gave us fear. It's an emotion, but it's something that's meant to be listened to, right? Not but in terms of like where's the truth as opposed to like listen to like I'm not gonna I have to stop because fear is scary. And I'm was there a point in your career that you can remember now where like you felt like a lot of fear, like and kind of was collapsing your ability to proceed, or you really had to work through it?
Well, I think being truthfully and being truthful and being transparent, I think a little bit of that comes to play every day. I mean, there certainly
Yeah.
was fear in making the move, each move I've made. I mean, from Ohio to Louisiana, I was born and raised in Ohio. I'd lived within
Mm.
10 miles of the town I grew up in my entire life. So just picking up and leaving and moving, I don't know if Louisiana is halfway across the country, but a good portion, away, there was a huge amount of fear there that
Hmm.
and for the longest, as I contemplated that offer and making that move, there were so many things that were going through my mind that I had security. I easily could have retired with Bueller's, provided I didn't do anything
Yeah.
stupid. But again, with that mentality of man, if you don't take this, are you going to regret it?
Right.
You have to kind of put fear to the side and say, hey, are you confident in who you are and what you can do and make that move? And I did. And same thing with California. I mean, that was another scary move. It was in the middle of the pandemic. It
Yep.
was, it was terrifying because in that short time that I was at Rouse's, I had already received a promotion. Again, very secure. Money more often than not, as far as salary goes, wasn't instrumental in my making the moves. It was the opportunity to learn more and grow each step of the way. And when I mentioned the financial part of moving from California to Louisiana, it wasn't a shortfall of what I was being paid there as much as it was how expensive it is to live there. Right.
Yeah.
So each step of the way there, that fear has been there. But fortunately for me, I've got a very supportive partner that
Yep.
either embraces the fear with me or just says, "Hey, we'll figure it out together," and
I
and and
love
we
that.
have. So I think that's how I would tackle the fear thing. I mean, but honestly, even in my current role, there's
Mhm.
times when there's certainly some fear from, man, you're working at this huge organization and you've never done this before, and
Mhm.
there's all these negatives. You got the angel
It
on this side, the devil on this side,
yeah.
and if you start listening to this one too much, I mean, you're probably not going to hear anything over here. So I think that's kind of my mindset as far as
Yeah.
fear goes.
Beautiful.
You know,
Beautiful.
but if you don't jump in the deep end every once in a while, you're never going to know what it's like.
There
So
we go. Yeah, I'd say you never know how tall you are until you're underwater sometimes. And yeah,
exactly.
I totally agree. And I also think that it's important, and one of the things I want to do in this podcast is help people to see that not everything's a straight line. But you look back for your career today, you go, oh, of course he's here, right? Yeah. In retrospect, everything appears to be a straight line, but at any given moment, there are decisions and things that happened, and faith, and really, I'd say, truly courage. Right, courage is when is not denying fear. It's saying, yeah, like I did have fear and I leaned into it, right? And that's what you
Right.
did. And I just want to share with people because I've been through this a lot myself. Is like it's not about being fearless. We're gonna have fear every day. It's gonna be hard. That fear causes us to grow, and then we have a choice. And it's not wrong. It's not wrong not to have courage, but man, those of us that decide to lean into that can have really amazing lives. With ups and downs beyond anything that you could ever imagine, but ideally more ups. So I was talking about this like fear thing. I worked as worked with dozens and dozens of brands, and many of whom like work with you and your and people you work with. But I see a lot of fear in our industry today. And I, part of what we're doing here today in this podcast is maybe talking about that a little bit. And I'm curious from you, like, as you see like the supply chain, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, How do you see it today versus maybe where it was 10 years ago? And what's changed? And it hasn't changed, maybe is some of the question.
That's a good question. If I look back 10 years ago, I lived in my bubble in Ohio, and our wholesaler that we use there had gone through many transformations, going back to prior to me getting there, it was Scott Ladd, and then it became Roundy's. While I
Hmm.
was there, it was Roundy's. Then it transitioned to Nash Finch. Then it's merged with Spartan and became Spartan Nash. And so I was living in that bubble, and then we were doing business with Cahey and some other local people. But in the conventional world, at least for me at that time, if I wanted conventional, I was buying from Spartan Nash. If I
Mm.
wanted especially natural organic, I was looking at Cahey. If I, and or some local guys like Lapari and some things like
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
So
Big
I
distributor.
was counting on trends from Lapari and Cahey, like the emerging, the kind of new stuff that wasn't quite, I'm going to say good. I don't know if that's the right word. It wasn't quite enough to be in conventional yet. So they were kind of starting with Cahey. And then in time, if you build them up enough, they would transition over to the conventional
Mm.
side
Yep.
and
Totally.
come through.
Yep.
So, and now, as far as how are things different, certainly for me, again, I live in my bubble here, which is kind of what we do here. But I guess I'd go back to California and say, there we were doing business with Unify and with Cahey and with Foundation Foods and with
Yep.
High
Yep.
Touch and all these different people. And so a lot more piece, 4 stores versus 13 stores. I think we had less distributors at those 13 stores than in California having that many more. So I think for me, at least in that realm, there's a lot more opportunity as far as for the little person, as far as
Mm.
to be able to get their foot in the door in a chain, especially in Southern California. But wide scale, like where I'm at now, we're back to where it's a more condensed version, where if you want distribution in all of our stores, you better do business with one of our big three,
Yeah.
because those three are the only ones that can distribute to all
Mm.
100 plus stores. And so I think that the difference is the availability to get to where you want to get to is very different depending on what
Mm.
you're trying to achieve. Does that make
Mm.
sense? I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I think one thing you commented on that I think might be worth more of discussion is like you mentioned, Cahey was kind of like the specialty distributor you looked at for like the new stuff.
Yours. Yep.
And, yeah, Bueller's right, and it's interesting because in a way, like the script got flipped because if you think about what happened is there didn't used to be natural stores of any scale,
Right.
natural specialty, right? It was conventional. Um, and conventional, by the way, was just dominated by only large CPG brands for the most part, except for maybe like the dairy department and some other areas. And then you had like Sprouts that became large and Whole Foods that became large and Fresh Market that became large. And what was once the specialty, that the realm of specialty became almost the realm of the wholesaler. These natural brands that were very specialty, very obscure, have become like Anani's, for example, is like an interesting example, become like mainstay. They're
Yep.
both in conventional and they're dominant in the natural channel. And I think it's interesting that distribution has morphed too. I mean, Cahey was not always, multi-billion-dollar company. They were much smaller with much smaller drop sizes, and now and maybe Unify as well. And now they're dropping as much as the wholesaler is dropping. So I think I'm curious, like that's part of the change too, right?
Right.
What the distributors are doing has changed a lot.
Yeah, so you look at it again at the conventional side. Your primary is your Spartan Nash, your AWG,
Mm.
your CNS, whoever you use, Super Value, and your secondary or specialty is your KE
Yeah,
Unify, someone
exactly.
like that. But then you get in the natural channel, and
Yep.
your wholesaler is Unify or KE,
Yep.
and then your secondary is probably one of your local guys, whether it's a Checks, whether it's
Yep.
a
Yep.
Foundation or someone like that. So
Yep.
um, the big in this channel is the little in the conventional
Yes.
channel. Yeah,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
there's definitely some interesting dynamics there.
And then as natural has grown and becoming more dominant, it's certainly not as big as conventional. I mean, by far, conventional is larger, but it has become a major piece of business. And then natural has become, I mean, remember when natural sets used to be like the whole set was this vapid set was the entire organic mix, and it was like
Yep.
multiple departments all in one. It was crazy. And now it's throughout the store and intermixed and blended in. And so there's just been these changes. And the other thing too, I'm curious, like, I remember growing up, there weren't emerging brands and there weren't natural stores. So the amount of emerging brands coming out, especially since COVID, I felt like was like an explosion. And so
Yeah.
and it's, is that, am I correct? Is that what you've seen too?
100%. Yeah, yeah. I go back again to California, and during my time there, that was what part of what fueled me on a daily basis was, okay, what am I going to see today? Because there was so much coming down of availability, and it was kind of the perfect storm with COVID and money being easily accessible from investors,
Mhm.
and
Yes, it was crazy.
there was a lot of space on shelves because there were so many supply issues. So you were constantly looking for products to help keep the shelves full, because some of the larger companies, Amy's comes to mind, had so many supply issues that you had holes on the shelf. So you
Hmm.
could take chances on brands at that time and just get them out there, because let's be honest, everything was selling. Sales were through the roof, so you couldn't make a bad decision during COVID,
You
because
couldn't.
you just couldn't.
You're gonna
So
comp. You're gonna comp. It's
exactly,
gonna be okay.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah, so it's just an interesting dynamic. And then to your point, you're exactly right. There was so much venture capital money, that money is dried up, and so it's I don't know. It's created I call it a depression in our space because of the whole model of what people entering the space were doing was like, okay, it's not about gross margin, it's not about COGS, it's not about net profit, it's about driving sales, claiming market share, and then going. And then something happened June, August of last year where that script got flipped, right? And it's like, oh no, it's all about margin. There's no money, and except for like a very few echelon of brands that have it. And I think that's part of what's going on here is that we have this lack of capital to fund emerging brands has caused a lot of challenges, and the cost of getting through distribution now become borne by people's own personal savings or whatever it is that they're investing, and it becomes a much more challenging place. Um,
definitely, definitely.
yeah, yeah, and then the other challenge would be the the fact that many distributors don't even make a profit on what they sell, right? They have to get that inside income from manufacturers. So I'm curious, like in your mind, and I don't want to be too provocative here, but just in your mind, like what does a retailer owe to an emerging brand? That's coming to them.
What do they owe?
Yeah, in terms of
Ooh, that's a
communication, transparency,
I was going to say, that's
guidance.
what does the retailer owe the brand? Well,
Or if anything, they probably owe nothing, but
I was going to say,
ideally.
are we talking about a brand that's in the store, or a brand that is presenting to the store? Because there's two different things.
I guess let's start with the brand presenting.
So if you're presenting, I think, well, I question whether a retailer owes a brand anything,
I
simply
love it.
because,
Love
well,
it.
and I say that because, I talked to someone earlier today about this example, and I've been very forthcoming with this in my posts and on our
Hmm.
podcast with regards to, if you're like, I'll just give two examples without naming brand names. This week, I've had two people reach out to me for categories that we don't even carry in the fresh market.
Okay.
And hey, they'd sent multiple emails, and sometimes if I'm being generous, I'll reply, hey, sorry, we don't do that.
Yeah.
But in the scope of how many emails I get, a lot of times if it's something like that is just like, come on, really? I'm deleting. But my point is, when I say that we might not owe someone that's presenting something anything, if you as a brand can't spend 5 minutes on my website and see that I don't
Yeah.
carry, again, I don't want to divulge what it is, but if you can't see
Yeah.
that I'm not even in that category, why should I,
You waste. Yeah. Yeah.
you're just throwing enough stuff against the wall and seeing what'll
Right.
stick, right?
That's it.
So,
That's it.
but assuming that we have agreed to, you're submitting for a category review or something like that, I think we owe you to listen, to give you, ideally give you feedback,
There we
and whether
go.
that's
I
honest,
think that I think it's feedback, right?
yeah,
I mean
yeah,
that
honest
is
feedback, which may not be what you want to hear, but, and I think that's the piece. If I put myself in a brand's perspective, I think it's really, something that you have to think about when you go into that space, is that you have to be prepared for somebody to tell you things you don't want to hear. You have
Humility.
to be prepared for people to tell you the truth that, again, that you don't want to hear, and maybe just burst your bubble. The analogy I gave earlier today was that basically, if you're a brand, it's your children, right?
Yeah.
And you love your
Yeah.
children, and they're the best,
They're
and
perfect.
they can
Yes.
do no wrong.
Yes.
But you have to be prepared to say, hey, we tried your product and there wasn't a lot of good response. Well, so and so loves it, and yeah, but that's so
Yeah.
I think that's what we owe is honest feedback as
Boom.
it pertains to us.
Yes.
Meaning
Right.
it might
It's
be a
not
perfect
generalized.
item.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be a
Yeah.
perfect item for a conventional or for a rural location or something like that, but it might not be right for us, and that's okay. But you have to. So what you owe us is you have to be willing to accept that and understand our decision, and that's one of the other things I always talk about when we're talking about my current role is if you haven't been in our stores, they're small, the set sizes are
Hmm.
small, and we don't have the space in footage that so many even people in our own space do. And so as such, our decisions, not that everyone's decisions aren't important, but they're even more so because every single decision we make is that much more important because of the limited real estate that we have.
Mm.
So I try and stress that that you have to understand who you're calling on, how
Yep.
they're going to market, and what kind of motivations they have. So
I think that I want to thank you for what you articulated. And I think it was a little bit of a setup by saying what is owed, because I think this is what I sense a lot is that there's a sense in some of the manufacturing community that they're owed something, right? And I just want to put out there that I don't know what industry in the world you can just walk into and it's going to be completely transparent. The red carpet's rolled out for you, and it's all about you, right? And what you said is so true. Like the importance of taking this, investing the time, creating the space to research, to learn, to ask questions, to show up in curiosity, as opposed to expecting it to be something about you. Well, gosh, there's thousands of emerging brands out there, and we are in a market economy where you get to make decisions on what you think is best. But I do think, and I say this a lot to emerging brands, is you have a hypothesis, and what we're at least when you work with like my company, like, we're working to test the hypothesis. The biggest gift that a retailer could give, and it's not something owed, it's a gift. It's really just honest feedback. And ideally, it's more than I get this all the time. It's like didn't have room in the set. It's like, okay, well that's really code for I didn't think it was going to sell. And if you have any feedback, I mean, it's really a gift. And I'm curious where you work, where you have worked, is that something that's prioritized at all or talked about in terms of giving that feedback?
I think it depends on a lot of it depends on the individual, their workload. There's so many different things there. I mean,
Yeah.
I certainly, speaking for myself, I certainly encourage it. But again, you have to be receptive to it on the other side.
Yeah.
And I
It, you,
think that's the key is so many times, no one likes being told no. I mean, you
yeah.
just don't like, no one likes to be
Rejection
told no.
sucks.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so how you react to that rejection, I mean, I go back to my quote, you get knocked down, you get up again, right?
Yes.
Um, just because it's no today doesn't mean it's going to be no tomorrow. And I think that
Mm,
resiliency and coming back, and in sales, you better be resilient. You better be prepared to be told
hmm
no, or be willing to pivot and make adjustments based on who you're calling on. And I think to
hmm
me, I certainly encourage giving that feedback, but I also know in reality, giving feedback, detailed feedback to every single brand,
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
it's hard to do, especially in some of the larger categories. When you look at cold case, for example, and you have literally over 100 submissions and you probably are adding, I don't know, making numbers up, 10, 15 new items, that leaves you 80 plus that you have to say no to. And is it realistic to give detailed feedback to all 80? Probably not. I mean,
Yeah.
but I think so. It's a give and take. And I think if you're, you get more flies with honey, and so
Yes.
if you in sales project that human side and the willingness to partner and work with the individual, I think you're probably going to get more feedback than
Mm-hmm.
if you're pushy and you're saying, oh, you need this, you're making a big mistake, got it, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably going to shut that door pretty quickly. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I would say the other, at least what I've experienced in my career in CPG, is that when feedback is given, it allows that brand to show up in a way that's better next time. To your point, like it's no, not never. And then ideally that partnership allows, ideally, like whatever retailer you're working with at the time, right? To have an opportunity to have this product that now succeeds, right? And sells. So at the end of the day, we're about growing, achieving margin targets, growing sales, right? The comp sales growth. It all goes together. So this my last area of question for you is on the distributor side, and not to say what's owed, but how can retailers show up better with distributors to help them show up better for manufacturers and for retailers?
That's a tough one. I think how can we work better with distributors? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. At the core, like, and maybe whether you're doing it today or whether you think it's more like a vision for how this could be better. But we see fill rates that are often below 90%, right?
Right,
Sometimes even in the 70s, where we're seeing a lot of challenges. And it's easy to say, well, it's all the distributor, right? Or it's the
right.
distributor then blames the manufacturer. Is there a role that the retailer can play to help the supply chain operate better?
I think there is. I think being so much of it when I look at the emerging brand space, so much of it comes back to the unknown, right? I mean, so you as an emerging brand, theoretically, if you're just getting started, you don't have a lot of track record with how your product's going to do.
Yeah.
So you're taking a chance on coming into my stores, right? And
Yep.
so I'm taking a chance on
Yep.
bringing you into my stores, and so then I'm taking it. UNFI's taking a chance. KE checks, whoever is taking a chance on putting this in their warehouse, and so all that unknown can create some issues with the supply chain from a standpoint of how's the product going to sell. You don't want to carry too much inventory because you're going to have issues with dating and whatnot, and so you run orders tight, and then you have empty shelves and so on and so forth. So I think if we can collaborate and work together and do due diligence with regards to if you're bringing a new item in, what's a comparable item? What's
Yeah.
a comparable item? What's comparable volume?
Yes.
And do I, as a retailer, have I set up the brand with that mentality? Okay, here's kind of what I'm thinking. Have that conversation with the brand so that, okay, here's what I'm thinking as far as volume. Does that make sense? Or what do you project based on your experience, where you sold, and then having those conversations with your distributors so that you understand what that movement is.
Yep.
And then if you come into an issue with the product not selling, huddling back up and saying, listen, brand, it's not selling the way we thought. What are we going to do?
Yep. This partner.
And then the same thing with the distributor is, hey, I know it's not, our forecast might have been off a little bit. Here's what we're doing to remedy it. And just being open as far as that goes.
I think that's beautifully said, right? This idea of, but I've seen things go wrong, right? When we launch an emerging brand into a larger retailer or middle-sized retailer, is getting that demand plan wrong. And the brand is like overjoyed, right? They're like, hey, massive orders. I borrowed money from my mom, my dad. We're just going all in. And then 6 months later or 9 months later, the product's being thrown away. And then the distributor is getting a black eye saying, well, I need this massive deduction. Well, the deduction happened because of challenges. And to your point, and this goes back to that victim mentality that I think we have to get beyond in the emerging brand community too, is we have to own our business. We have to notice something's not moving. We have to raise the red flag. We have to, hey, what can we do? Right? Can we do more demos or digital coupons or whatever we need to do? We're all partnered in this. In the end of the day, if something doesn't work, it really hurts everybody in the supply chain. And yet we're all taking these risks every day as we're launching more emerging brands that are all they are is hypotheses, right? That we're testing out. So I don't know. I think it's something that we as a supply chain can every level could do better and how we show up, because I
tell people all the time that you kind of said it, that they get excited, they get distribution, you got plus stores. That's in the scope of things. That's
easy.
That's the
Yep.
easy part. The hard
Getting
part
it
is
off.
getting it out the front door after you've gotten that distribution,
Hmm.
and then getting it back, the replenishment order in. And
Yep.
those are the hard parts. The easy part is getting your distribution. Once it's on the
Yeah.
shelf, that's where the work starts. And and
Yes.
and I think so many people see the finish line as distribution. Well, we just
Yep.
got 2,000 doors.
Nope.
That's the start. That's the start. That's where the work starts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's and I think that's what so many brands lose sight of, as far as their end game is getting distribution, when
Hmm.
in
No.
reality that's when the work starts. So
Yeah, exactly. And guess what? The nuance of who owns ensuring that it gets off shelf, it's yeah, it's the retailer in partnership with the distributor making sure their product gets there at the right price efficiently, and that the manufacturer is supporting it as well, right? And then it's not just a static thing. As we go, we're going to get data that tells us, is it working, is it not, and what are we doing about it?
right.
I agree with you 100%. The hardest part, yeah, it sounds crazy to a young emerging brand, but the easiest thing is to get on the fresh market shelves relative to the challenge of getting it off the shelf,
Absolutely.
in a way that
Absolutely.
makes sense, makes it profitable for everybody. So that's fantastic. Wait, thank you for being here. You have been vulnerable and open, and you've given me and our audience so much in insights and value today that I know that this podcast will be spoken about for ideally years to come, because you went into it all. You covered it all. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's always good catching up with you, and I think it this is the easy part, just having conversation, right? You made it
Mhm.
easy as far as just being conversant. Just like my podcast, our podcast. We didn't rehearse anything.
No,
We didn't have a
no.
conversation prior. You just asked me if I'd show up, and here we are, right? But I think that's the beauty of what you're doing, is making it easy to just talk about the business, right? I mean,
Mm,
that's what we're in, and that's what we know. So if you can just talk about it, I think you can solve a lot of the pain points.
it is, and to your point, there is the business part we talked about, but then also remembering that we're all people, and right, and we
Yep,
have our fears, we have our faults, we've had our yeah, both of us, we've had our failures, and this is all part of the human experience. And I feel so blessed that we get to do this journey together, because in a
absolutely.
way, like you and so many people are my family, right? Like
Yep.
this is a family in this supply chain, and I'm grateful for your help in helping us to kind of reconnect it all. So. Wade, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for
Thank
being here
you.
today. Okay.